The early morning air in Washington carried the uneasy chill of a capital in crisis. Outside the White House, cameras whirred as US Vice President J.D. Vance stepped up to the microphone, his voice sharp, his tone urgent. For weeks, a government shutdown had paralyzed federal operations, halting pay for tens of thousands of workers. But Vance's words today weren't about politics. They were about people. The TSA officers scanning bags, the air traffic controllers keeping skies safe, the pilots waiting for paychecks that never came. He began plainly, almost grimly. "I worry about the people who are scanning our bags and making us get through the security line," he said, describing what he called the real human cost of political gridlock. They're not getting their paychecks. They're starting to get worried about how to feed their families and how to pay school tuition and everything else. The vice president paused, glancing toward reporters. "I worry about the pilots who haven't gotten paid in a long time. I worry about the air traffic controllers who make this entire system extra safe behind him." Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy listened intently. Another reminder of how deeply this shutdown had struck the nation's transportation system. Airports across America were facing mounting delays, and federal workers were showing up unpaid, still trying to keep the system functioning. Vance's tone grew sharper. "I worry about them, more worried about their credit card bill than they should be because they're not getting a paycheck, because Democrats refuse to open the government." It was an unmistakable escalation, the kind of line that headlines are made of. Yet it also underscored Vance's emerging role as one of the administration's most aggressive public messengers. In just a few weeks as vice president, he had carved out a voice that was part populist, part disciplinarian, appealing to the frustrations of ordinary workers while hammering Democrats for what he called irresponsible brinkmanship. The White House driveway press briefing that morning was short, lasting barely 15 minutes, but its message was designed to ripple through every newsroom and every television broadcast. The administration was demanding an end to the shutdown immediately. "We have had now multiple votes to reopen the United States government," Vance continued, the tone turning procedural but still loaded with reproach. "The House of Representatives has voted affirmatively to reopen the United States government. 52 Republicans and 3 Democrats consistently vote to reopen it, but we need 60 votes." He emphasized the number like a challenge. "All we need to end the craziness, to pay the air traffic controllers, to pay the TSA agents, to pay the pilots, to make sure that food stamp benefits continue to go out to the American people who need them. All we need is 5 reasonable Democrats." For a moment, his words seemed to cut through the usual political noise. 5 votes. That's all he was asking for. 5 reasonable Democrats, he repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. The government shutdown, now entering its 3rd week, had left nearly 800,000 federal workers either furloughed or working without pay. The effects rippled across agencies, from airport security lines stretching longer each day to national parks locked behind barricades. Analysts warned that another week could bring serious disruptions to welfare programs and even flight safety if key personnel began missing work. Vance framed it as a moral, not just political issue. "All we need," he said again, "is for 5 Democrats to do the right thing." The reporters' questions turned to the bigger picture, what comes next and whether compromise was possible. Here, Vance leaned on a familiar refrain of the Trump administration's posture, that negotiations must happen only once government operations are restored. "I just want to say to any Democrat in the United States Senate," he said, locking eyes with the cameras, "we are happy to talk about any policy issue, healthcare policy, tax policy, regulatory policy, but not at the point of a gun." The phrase struck a nerve. "You do not get to take the American people's government hostage," he said firmly, "and then demand that we give you everything you want in order to pay our air traffic controllers. It's a ridiculous set of demands." His message was unmistakable. Reopen first, debate later. In many ways, Vance's remarks were an attempt to shift the emotional terrain of the shutdown debate away from numbers and negotiations and toward the lived experiences of working Americans. Throughout his brief political career, Vance has framed himself as a champion of the forgotten middle, a voice for those caught between elite politics and paycheck anxiety. That same narrative underpinned his appeal today. As the press cameras zoomed in, Vance stepped back from the podium, gesturing for Secretary Duffy to speak. Duffy reiterated the practical consequences of the shutdown: airports stretched thin, maintenance schedules slipping, and families separated by cancelled flights. Every day this continues, Duffy warned, the risks grow. Reporters shouted follow-ups. Would the administration accept a short-term funding bill? Was the White House open to compromise on healthcare or climate provisions? Vance didn't answer directly. Instead, he returned briefly to the microphone, summarizing his stance in one crisp line. Let's reopen the government and then let's sit down and talk about how to compromise on policy for the American people. That soundbite would dominate the evening news cycle. As the vice president's motorcade pulled away, staffers inside the West Wing continued last-minute briefings with Senate Republicans, trying to map out potential defectors among moderate Democrats. Party sources said quiet discussions were ongoing with a handful of senators from swing states who faced pressure from both business groups and federal worker unions to vote for reopening. Political observers noted that Vance's tone, though aggressive, was calibrated, a balance between confrontation and reassurance. He framed the crisis not as partisan warfare, but as a test of basic governance. His emphasis on air traffic controllers, TSA agents, and food stamp recipients served to humanize the cost of inaction, while subtly invoking the specter of national vulnerability, a familiar rhetorical tactic in American shutdown politics. Across the country, the human toll was becoming visible. In Atlanta, TSA officers at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport reported waiting in line at food banks after missing 2 pay periods. In Chicago, air traffic controllers were covering double shifts to prevent staffing shortages. Social service agencies in several states began issuing emergency guidance for families dependent on federal nutrition programs. By mid-afternoon, cable networks had begun looping Vance's quote, 5 reasonable Democrats, as a rallying soundbite. The phrase quickly became a trending hashtag on social media, amplified by Republican senators and conservative commentators. Democrats, meanwhile, pushed back, accusing the administration of politicizing federal workers' struggles. White House aides privately acknowledged that Vance's blunt messaging was deliberate. He's channeling public frustration, one senior official said. People want the government to work. They don't care who's to blame. They just want it open. At the same time, the administration knew that its appeal rested on a simple political equation. If Democrats could be painted as obstructionists, public opinion might tilt toward the Republican side in a matter of days. By evening, as Washington's skyline faded into amber light, the vice president's words continued to reverberate. On local news stations, families of unpaid federal workers shared stories of overdue rent and mounting anxiety. Airline unions issued new warnings about fatigue and safety standards. And economists began tallying the mounting cost, billions of dollars in lost productivity and consumer spending each week. Still, inside the Capitol, negotiations remained deadlocked. Senate Democrats demanded guarantees on healthcare subsidies and environmental spending before agreeing to reopen. Republicans refused, insisting on a clean continuing resolution. In this standoff, Vance's speech became more than a plea. It became a line in the sand. As the night wore on, a few moderate Democrats publicly hinted they might break ranks if talks failed to progress. The vice president's strategy, appealing not just to politics but to conscience, seemed to be finding its mark. It's not about winning, Vance told a small pool of reporters later that evening. It's about responsibility. He spoke of truck drivers delayed at ports, of veterans missing disability checks, of parents struggling with childcare as federal programs froze. Each anecdote served to remind his audience that shutdowns aren't abstract. They're lived experiences rippling through every corner of society. In the following days, those remarks would become part of a broader narrative, one that framed the shutdown as a test of political reason. Vance's call for 5 reasonable Democrats became a symbol of bipartisan possibility, even as the reality remained fiercely partisan. In a country weary of brinkmanship, his words tried to offer a middle path, one rooted in accountability, urgency, and an appeal to shared duty. Whether that message would move the needle in Congress remained uncertain. But as he left the White House driveway that morning, the vice president had already achieved one goal. He'd recentered the conversation on the people who couldn't afford another day of political paralysis.